shall I do like an official recording? I'm going to pass it over to Posit and Jeremy in
Cool.
particular to start the session. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks for being here. For those that don't know me, I'm Jeremy Allen. I work at Posit. I'm on our marketing team. I've been in sales and I've been in customer success, mostly helping public sector Posit customers all around the world. Lots in the US, Canada, the UK, Asia, a ton in Europe. So I've gotten a good amount of exposure to public sector folks who are using Posit tools. And that includes Quarto, but also Shiny, all the other open source packages, plus our professional tools like Workbench, Posit Connect, and Posit Package Manager. In fact, Zoe and I started planning this Q&A session when I was still a part of our public sector sales team. I've since moved over to our product marketing team, where I can focus a bit more on products and really helping Posit understand the unique requirements of our public sector customers. So this event still fits really well with that. So we're happy to learn about what you're doing and how you're using the open source R and Python packages and what your workflows look like. And then I have our Quarto team or representatives from our Quarto team with us so that we can answer your questions about Quarto. So let them introduce themselves. Andrew, do you want to go first?
Sure. My name is Andrew Holtz. I work actually across a couple of different teams. I work at the Quarto team, Shiny team, MLverse teams, and just really excited to be here. I mean, honestly, Christoph and Carlos know way thousands times % more than I do about Quarto, but I'm really interested to hear kind of what the challenges you all have are in adopting it and figuring out how we fit it with a small team, trying to get a big product out the door. So really looking forward to the discussion. Thanks.
Andrew is being humble. He's the head of open source engineering. So that includes Shiny and Quarto and all the other open source teams. Carlos, Christoph, who wants to go next?
Can you all hear me? It's to making sure that my mic, okay, thank you. I'm Carlos. I've been working at Posit for about 3 years now, in Quarto all of the time. I'm currently the lead engineer on the project, and I've started I started a few years ago, like I said, 3 years or so, on incorporating some of the interactive visualization, sort of reactive JavaScript, so very much on like the engineering part. Before joining Posit, I was a professor. I used to live in Tucson until just a month ago or so. So I lived there for 10 years. I was a professor at the University of Arizona for like 8 years or so. And I've always been in the periphery of open source development for sort of scientific communication. I wrote my thesis on that kind of thing and been working on it ever since. And so it's great to be at Posit and working on open source that gets to sort of help all you do incredibly important work. And so it's just really a joy and an honor to be part of this.
So hi, everyone. I'm Christoph. So I'm also in the Quarto team. So I joined Posit initially on the R Markdown team, and I'm still working on R Markdown and maintaining the R package. But now most of my time is on the Quarto project too, alongside all the R work I'm still doing. So I'm coming from the R community.
Thanks, gentlemen. Appreciate it. And we also have Colin from our partner, Jumping Rivers, who's over on your side of the world. Colin, do you want to say hi?
Hi, I'm Colin Gillespie at Jumping Rivers. I've probably met most of you at the NHS-R over the last, I don't know, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. And as Jeremy said, we're based in the UK, up in Newcastle, and we do lots of R, Posit, Python things. Thanks. Excellent.
And let me give a quick overview of how we're going to run the meeting today. I'm going to drop a link in the chat right now. This link is to the site where you can ask your questions anonymously. If you want to put your name, you can put your name, and then you can upvote questions from other people. So that way the popular questions rise to the top, and we'll make sure we get those answered, even if we can't answer all the questions. So make sure you upvote other questions that you see that you like and you might want to have answered. That way we cover the most important things first. So that'll be the majority of what we do today. Go through this Q&A. Our Quarto team and myself will help answer those questions. I would like to start us off with a little bit of Q&A from us to you. We would like to know a little bit more about some of the R and Python projects you have going on. Obviously, don't tell us anything that's proprietary or sensitive in nature, but if you don't mind, let us know a couple of really important projects you're working on that require some kind of communication or reporting that Quarto might be used for, either Quarto documents or Quarto websites or now Quarto dashboards. And then help us understand what these projects are for and why they're important. And then that'll help us have a feel for the kind of work that you're in day to day. And if you don't mind, if you do want to volunteer that information and speak up, introduce yourself and tell us where you're at, if you're associated with a particular NHS trust or a larger part of the NHS organization. Give us a sense of where you're at. Who wants to tell us a little bit about some of your favorite R projects? Yeah, I see a hand up. Jason, go for it.
Hi, thanks for this talk. I'm really looking forward to it. I adopted Quarto quite early on and often thought it was Quattro, like the Audi Quattro or whatever. I was saying it incorrectly for years. And I use parameterized reporting to help support feasibility assessments for research studies that we deliver in our emergency department. So I lead a team of nurses that are funded through our NHS-R, and we are often invited to take part in studies, but what's important is to know whether or not you have the right population to deliver a clinical trial, because clinical trials are lots of work and they're expensive to run. And if you aren't going to be able to deliver a study, you shouldn't really open it. You should focus on other studies. So I use kind of our national data sets that we collect and use parameters to build SQL queries that then build out analysis and population reports to suggest whether or not we might have a population that would meet the requirements of a study. And whereas I used to do each one manually, I've turned it into a kind of a reproducible pipeline so that I just put in the SNOMED codes for the disease, population parameters, and it runs in 5 minutes, and I get the same report out, which I can send to the investigators, and they can decide whether or not they want to pick it up and run with it or not. And a few other bits and pieces for kind of more academic focused work, but mostly reporting results of stuff as well.
Yeah, that's great detail. And if you don't mind, I'll ask a couple of follow-up questions because I just want to help sort of situate the kind of studies you're talking about within the broader NHS. Can you give us an example of some of the feasibility studies that you've had to do if they were associated with particular projects in the NHS? And what I'm really looking for is if your study went well and you gave it to whoever needed it, were they seeking that as part of a larger project or implementation of something new in the NHS or for, I don't know, a broader piece of funding? How can we connect the dots up from the studies you're talking about to operations in the NHS?
So most of it links to academic outputs. So there are a few papers that we've put together now that are based off data extraction through Quattro reproducible pipelines now that I've put together. So we've got one that's built around head injury processes, and the whole pipeline was based around a Quattro report for extracting patients who attend the emergency department between 2 date ranges with a presenting complaint of head injury who have a CT head, and then I extract and pull all the data that describes their pathway. The studies are all ethically approved and consented appropriately, obviously, and that kind of that's just kind of become the routine way that we're working on these things. In terms of like the delivering trials for other people, we're a very successful team, and one of the most successful research teams in the country for delivering emergency trials. So, and part of that is that we don't open trials that won't be relevant to our population. So we've taken part in studies looking at patients with chest pain, and the combination of the tooling that I've got available to me through R and Quarto, and our reasonably decently developed EHR, which collects decent data about patients, has meant that I can automate the extraction of complete observational cohort studies, which other centres in the UK can't do. And so we've put 7,500 patients into an observational study of cardiac chest pain, and we're one of the only centres in the UK who have been able to do that, because everyone else would have had to collect it manually. But that's kind of a combination of,
very cool,
having a good EHR with collecting good data, and then having the knowledge how to extract it appropriately.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Really good context. Appreciate that. Are there any other R projects or major workflows that you all are working on you want us to know about before we dive into the questions?
Looks like Chris has there's some hands raised, Jeremy.
Yep, I see it. Go ahead, Chris.
Thanks. It was just a bit of context, I suppose, for how we and my team use it. So hi, everyone. I'm Chris Maney. I'm head data scientist with Birmingham and Solihull Integrated Care Board. And because not everybody works in our country or indeed system, just to explain a little bit about how the health service is structured. So we have a national health service, which is all under one umbrella, but it's actually composed of lots of different organisations who work under a common sort of banner. We have regional things that organise the care and the funding, and they are called integrated care boards, and under them they have a so-called integrated care system. So we have hospitals and other providers underneath those in regions. So I work for an integrated care board rather than a provider, rather than a hospital. So the sorts of work that myself and our team do are things like looking at population health changes, forecasting forward into the future, trying to work out what our population might need. Often things to do with dissecting the makeup of the current population, dissecting the activity at different providers. And we, I suppose, like many other people in the country, are moving, I guess, technically from a profession where really we weren't really a defined profession. We were often people who were fairly smart and people who use computers, which has gone through a series of people using Excel, building up SQL skills, using wider BI tools, and then really with, I suppose, data science becoming more accessible, maybe 2012 onwards, really. We started to see people who were maybe interested and maybe with academic interests picking up R, Python or other things, or bringing stuff in from other places they've worked. The NHS-R community, I think, rode that wave a little bit, where there were people dotted around organisations saying, how do we do this? We can't get this through our IT departments. We can't get the right infrastructure. How do we do this? Can we share and try and work together to do this? So I've got a small but very smart team who work across various different things. So there's very strong SQL focus. There's a lot of Power BI work, but there's a lot of people with some R skill to a less or greater extent. I suppose I spend probably 80% of my time in R but I have a couple of Python people as well. So with Quarto coming forward in the last few years, it's been very useful to me because I can now look at a reproducible framework across my Python users and my R users. Because before that I was pushing R Markdown because that was fantastic. But I couldn't spool that out to my Python users as well. So we're at the point where we're trying to do that. And I suppose I'm interested now on how do I move the team towards code first stuff on GitHub, whether it's R or Python, communicating in a standard way using templates through Quarto. So I suppose that's kind of my interest today. So some of my questions are a bit more along the lines of how do we do templates? How do we do stuff that my team can use? I suppose rather than Quarto features. Does that help?
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Thanks.
So what I propose is we jump into the questions and we'll go through that for a little bit. And then we'll probably take a break kind of in the middle of that and maybe ask you a couple more questions before we end up. We have until the top of the hour. It's like 9:24 on my side. So we still have about 35 minutes. All right, so I'll just start asking the questions. Posit team, feel free to just jump in if you want to be the one to answer. If not, I'll just call on someone. All right, our first question is, what are your favorite features and capabilities of Quarto that you think are underutilized?
All right. One of the first things I implemented when I started on the project was the observable JavaScript integration. So this is a little on the wonky programming side for folks who are not deep in it, but there's a separate company actually that builds an open source product called Observable JavaScript, which is a way to make your web pages, make it very easy to write web pages with interactive content in a way that is very close to what Shiny does, but instead of writing R code, you write JavaScript. So it's kind of like a reactive JavaScript thing, which is really great if you want to write sort of fast interactive content that doesn't need to sort of talk back to a server as often in R. And one of my really favorite things that I think is actually underutilized is that in Quarto, the R reactives that you get from Shiny. So if you're using Quarto to build a Shiny app, which you can do, so you can actually have Quarto generate from a single markdown page, both the UI and the server page to get real Shiny applications going. If that page has observable reactives, they both work together transparently. So from R, you can refer to the JavaScript observables to get sort of JavaScript values. And from JavaScript reactives, you can refer to Shiny reactives. And they both work reactively and know what parts go on the server and what parts go on the client. So if you can do both of those things, they just work transparently with each other, which is quite nice because observable has a huge library of JavaScript observables that is sort of quite different from the Shiny thing. So if you find one piece of sort of observable JavaScript, you can just directly import it and use it from anywhere on the web, and it just works. And then you can do sort of reuse them within your Shiny dashboards. So it's a way to get your Shiny dashboards to do something that's quite sophisticated with JavaScript, and it feels sort of native and nice. And so we have documentation on that, but I think it's underutilized because maybe folks need to know a little bit more about more things. But for the people that really want it, it's really nice, and it just works. So that's my pick.
Any, Christoph? If not, we'll go to the next question.
Yeah, no, I can say something.
Cool.
It's maybe it could be only an impression, but for me, it's all the Quarto theming system that we have. It's here since the beginning of Quarto, and I think it's underutilized, or it was, I would say. And we worked on brand feature, which is new, and you may or not know about yet, which hopefully will simplify the use of that. But it's really powerful because it's something we started to do late in R Markdown. And so in latest R Markdown version, we had features thanks to BSlib work and all the work from the Shiny team to customize document, but it's way less advanced than what we have in Quarto. But it required to know a bit of SCSS and some technology. And so I'm thinking maybe we need more documentation, templates, examples. But hopefully the brand system will help to get like customization, because it's really easy to get non-default output with Quarto.
I guess the answer is it's underutilized because we released it just over a month ago on the latest version of Quarto. But brand YAML, if you haven't seen it, is a really nice way to create sort of themed documents. And they theme not only HTML, but they also theme your typed PDFs, which is quite nice. So you get sort of this consistent output. And they theme presentations and they theme dashboards all uniformly from the same format. So if you need to do like branding and you have fonts and colors, you just edit this one YAML file and then it works across formats. So
yeah, and just to piggyback on that, it also works on Shiny. So if you get your brand.yaml, you have a file that becomes very portable, not just across Quarto documents to make it really easy, but also into Shiny as well.
And
one of
the goals that we have for this year is we're going to be putting engineering time into making it very easy for plotting libraries in multiple languages to also support that. So if you're using, for example, ggplot, you should be able to just plop a brand YAML file and like with one command have it pick it up, and then your charts are now themed exactly in the same way. We're hoping to do that for matplotlib and Seaborn, and then perhaps for Plot9 and some of the other plotting libraries. But we hope to have sort of good coverage for these things, not only in the documents themselves, but on the libraries that use them. So like from ggplot, matplotlib to like Great Tables and GT and so on.
Yes, so Chris, that touches a little bit on what you were wishing for a minute ago, was how to help bring everyone together with some more coherent outputs, and brand.yaml would definitely help make your different outputs look the same based on a single YAML file. I do want to just make it clear what Carlos wrapped up with, that theming across, say, an HTML report output and a presentation output will not translate into the plots that are within those outputs, but the outputs will share the same colors, fonts, all the things that are in the brand YAML. But as of right now, that won't be passed into the plots. So in the plot code, you'll still need to specify your color and your font, that kind of thing. But Carlos, I believe the next iteration of this is going to bring that into the plots within the outputs.
Yeah, we've developed this brand YAML feature very consciously as sort of independently of the system. So it's not even a sense of like, in the next iteration of Quarto is that now we are going to do like a bit of engineering outreach and sort of like go into the folks that write those libraries and just like contribute code that will make that work well. And hopefully the code will be incorporated, and then in future versions, it will just be there. But yeah, so stay tuned for that. That's coming this year.
Sweet. All right, and the next question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jeremy. I just wanted to piggyback one comment. Carlos also mentioned types. I think just in general, one of the things I think that's really exciting, again, it's kind of cheating underutilized because it's kind of on the newer side, but Quarto we're continuing to invest in making types work really well. So if you have to generate PDFs and you've fought with LaTeX and you're sick of that nonsense, types and the templating and how fast it is, and it's really clean, and Quarto can work really well with it. And we're going to continue to kind of, as I said, invest and chat with them and figure out how we can make it all work really well. So it's something to investigate if that's an area that you work in, generating complex reports. Like we did our Posit PBC report with it, and it came out really well. So we're pretty excited about it.
Yeah, continuing apparently the tradition of systems with hard to pronounce words. Typed is how they want you to pronounce that. It is a system that exploded sort of in popularity in the last, like it's existed only for 5 years, but it's sort of stands a genuine chance of displacing LaTeX in academic circles, which is not something I thought I would ever say in my lifetime, which is fantastic. Because I've used LaTeX for my previous academic life, and it's great, but it's also really awful in terms of user experience and how slow it is. And typed fixes many of those things. You can use it as a standalone system and it's great, but Quarto offers great support for it. So you can have your markdown files and you can just use format typed, and it's an alternate PDF format. So generate PDFs just like they would for LaTeX, but it generates them a lot faster, and it's a lot easier to control appearance and things of that sort. So yeah, I guess that's another new underutilized favorite feature that I think will be much more popular like 2 years from now even.
Yeah, that's a good one. I have a follow-up question, and this is for the NHS folks about your reporting outputs, particularly PDF. Do you have strict requirements for the format of your PDF output? And the reason I ask, or perhaps let me give you an analogy from the US. One of the agencies that I work with is NOAA. That's our National Oceanic and Atmospheric Agency. When they produce reports, they have some internal regulation that says they have to produce a Microsoft Word version, an HTML version, and a PDF version, and they all have to look the same. Do you have a kind of requirement like that? Go ahead, Chris.
Different organizations might have their own requirements, but there isn't an NHS-wide thing for anything other than a national statistic. So if you have a regulated national statistic, you have to publish it in certain formats. So they have to be open accessible formats. So you have to have the open equivalents of kind of Word documents and things like that. And they're supposed to look identical. But that's the only place I've seen that requirement in our area is when you have a regulated official statistic.
Is that specification public? Can I find it and look at it?
Let me have a little look and see if I can find it.
Sure, if you find it, just drop it in the chat. Go ahead, Zoe.
I'm going to add for NHS, I don't think there is necessarily a standard, but there is in civil service. And so there are standards around what we publish as well. So really, we shouldn't be using just PDF. We should be publishing for public consumption, things that are fully accessible. So you don't necessarily need things to read it. So there's definitely information from civil servants, but that's not necessarily followed by public sector.
Gotcha.
It's been shared in the chat, actually. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you.
And just to add as well, our identity colours for NHS-R Community are the same as NHS generally, but we don't use some things which are particularly NHS branded. So there are things that are copyright, like the logo, and we don't use a particular typeset font because you have to pay for the official one. So we use the second one, which is available, which is Arial. So just to say, for the sort of like purposes of recording, accessibility should be something that we should be thinking about a lot.
Yeah. So to quickly follow up on accessibility, this is something that Posit is paying very close attention to. There is for not only in sort of UK and European Union guidelines that are sort of have existed for a long time. We do pretty well for accessibility in our HTML formats. There are a few things that we could do better, but we do fairly well. But in the context of sort of American institutions, sort of US government, there is a change in the way that the Americans with Disabilities Act will be enforced starting next year, and it will start essentially kicking in for websites as well. And so American universities, like public universities in the United States, are quite worried about this because essentially there are folks that believe that any websites that are published as like course materials even will have to pass the accessibility guidelines, or they will be liable. And the American with Disabilities Act, sorry, this is a little bit US-centric, but the reason this is terrifying for people is that the way that enforcement of the ADA works is quite strange. Essentially, people can file claims, ADA claims against the website, and then people need to find them. So the way that like all sidewalks in the US are ADA accessible is that whenever someone finds one that isn't, they take a picture, they file a claim, and then the owner of the property gets fined. And it's a quite fast process that stings because people just get many fines over it. And so that's how the enforcement happens, which is a strange, weird American thing. But it's going to start happening for websites next year, presumably. And so folks are quite worried about it. And so we are investing a lot of time in making sure that whatever tools are used for this enforcement are going to our things are going to pass to, and hopefully those will transfer for like sort of more global usage as well. But this is something we're paying very close attention, and you can expect us to like do work on this year and the next year as well.
Excellent. All right, the next question up is from Daniel, and it says, I would be interested in any updates regarding deploying a serverless Shiny application for R within Quarto.
So there are a number of ways that you can do that. So there's a link to an extension that was developed by an external. So James Balamuta was a frequent contributor to some Quarto features and has a lot of really good extensions. So Codeless Professor is his GitHub username, I believe, or something like that. So that's in the question. But we have, Posit has a number of libraries that allow that as well. So if you search for Shiny Live, and they are developed by Barrett Schlorke and the Shiny team. And so this is possible to do if your application doesn't do communication with the data behind the server, right? Like one of the reasons people use Shiny is so that you can have a server where there's a database somewhere and there might be some authentication or some execution of the like server code behind that like gets data, brings it to the front end, and then you visualize it. So if your Shiny application doesn't have those concerns, then you can like run it in Quarto in a mode. So it's an extension that you have to install, but it's available not only from there, but it's available from some of our developers as well. And so you can use that both in Python and both Shiny for Python and Shiny for R. So that should be working. If the question is sort of, something doesn't quite work for me, please feel free to reach out to us either through Jeremy or, we're all easy to find online, or send us an email. We'll be happy to follow up on that. Christoph?
Yes, I wanted to add like the link shared in the question is directly, for example, for the Shiny Live Quarto extension. So this extension should be working. Maybe there is cases that are not handled yet, but I think like regarding the question, any updates, we would need more details about what are expected. For work, we know we have some probably things to look into it. Like recently we had a question in the discussion board about doing interactive dashboard with Quarto using Shiny Live, and currently it's only using Shiny not live, so not serverless Shiny. So maybe there is like more things to do, but there is no recent update on that. But as Carlos mentioned, it's developed. Shiny Live is developed by not by Quarto directly, but by another team. So we know we need to work closer together in some use case, but we also need more use case. So if you have like any use case to share, it will really help us to know what we need to prioritize on this side.
Daniel, did you want to share anything about use case? Is Daniel even on? I don't see a Daniel on here.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, gotcha.
So the use case is primarily, as you say, like if you want to use a Shiny app, then you have to have a Shiny server set up, and that just is more overhead, more infrastructure required. So if you want to share, call it a dashboard, call it a report with stakeholders, then if you need to set up a Shiny server to do that, then that's just more overhead. And if it was possible to do so without a Shiny server, then that would be advantageous.
The relation with Quarto regarding this use case is that you can embed a Shiny Live app inside a Quarto document. So you can but you still need to build the Shiny app in itself. What I'm not sure it works straightforward, but it's like definitely not documented on our website, is that Quarto has an interactive feature where you can build Shiny app using Quarto, and it's how interactive dashboard work, or historically Shiny pre-rendered document in our Markdown ecosystem that we leverage in Quarto. And right now, I don't think, or at least it's not straightforward to do it from Quarto. Maybe it's possible, like generating a Shiny app with Quarto and then converting the Shiny app to a Shiny Live version, because I think they have conversion function, but we should definitely have something more straightforward, or at least I think we should have, but I did not research yet how this should work. But like we have a question related to that, so it's why I guess it was in relation.
Thank you.
And Daniel, just to make sure that I'm clear, was there a particular project that's being held up because it doesn't work the way that you want, or is this just more of a general question about when and if these things will be possible?
As we have access to more and more data, then stakeholders want reports on particular aspects of that data. And you can parameterize data as well, and Quarto is good at that. You end up potentially sharing quite a lot of reports. Ideally, really, you give people a sort of relatively filtered, relatively conditioned report that they can then drill down on slightly further using functionality within the report itself. That's like the ideal scenario, really. And that would be helpful. Instead of sending out lots of detailed but quite parameterized reports and stakeholders then receiving quite a lot of different reports in their email inbox. I recognize that you could set up a Shiny server and have a dashboard there, and that gets around the problem to some degree. But then the other problem that I find in that situation is that you potentially end up sending people down a rabbit hole, because they end up spending a lot of time drilling down on the data, or potentially not drilling down on the data because they just wanted to have it at their fingertips. So in an ideal world, really, when sharing data with stakeholders, then it'd be nice to share a sort of HTML format report with them that they can then drill down on their own machine. But that's not so easy at the moment because, as I say, it kind of depends on a Shiny server. So in our setting in Newcastle hospitals where I work, then we share, for example, antimicrobial resistance patterns using HTML format Quarto reports with stakeholders, and then they can look at resistance patterns in their own patient cohort to decide on things like which antibiotic do I feature in my guidelines, for example, based on the resistance patterns of the organisms in that patient cohort. Another example is we have patient level data on prescribing patterns of antimicrobials, and we've combined that with data from the EPR telling us whether someone has sepsis, whether their OBS are stable, and then stakeholders can drill down on patients who are unstable, who are on the wrong antibiotics, for example, based on the indication that's given in the prescription. And so we have lots of this kind of data, and I share it currently with stakeholders in HTML format reports that I send to them by email. And I guess what I'm aiming at is or looking for is an answer to the question, am I able to distribute this data in a more efficient way than sending parameterized reports to the stakeholders that they then have a static report to look at? Ideally, really, they would be able to drill down on their report slightly. And that's where I think Shiny has some sort of role.
Yeah, I really appreciate the extra context. That's very helpful. Yeah, the basic idea is perhaps eliminate a few reports if a single one has some interaction that could then encompass the equivalent amount of info that might be in 2 or 3 reports. They get one instead. Yeah. And then if it's Shiny Live, it doesn't need a server component. And so now you're sort of maximizing what the person can get out of the report and minimizing the infrastructure necessary to make it happen. Yeah, that general principle is important. There's a more efficient way to share reports now rather than email, but it still requires a server. It wouldn't necessarily be a specific Shiny server. It could be something like Posit Connect, which I think the NHS has, but I don't know if you all have access to it. But there is a license for it there. So you could share that way. Folks could access the reports there just via a URL. So if that's available, you have access to that. I mentioned Posit Connect just because it's a commercial product, not so that you pay us for it, but it has a commercial license. You can control who can access it. And so if you're sharing data that's sensitive, then you don't have to worry about it being public. You just can have an NHS Connect server and put all your reports on there. And if that were the case, it would also not be a problem to put Shiny apps on there because it can host Shiny apps. So then the serverless part becomes less important because you have the Connect server. And then you just make whatever apps and reports you want with whatever interactivity you want, and don't worry about having to eliminate the server part. But we'll definitely take the feedback about the serverless too, because if we can make that even easier, I think we should.
In as
Yeah,
well,
go ahead,
because
Zoe.
just to clarify, we were shaking our heads. So if we do blur this out, the NHS doesn't have its own license for all NHS, so we tend to have them per trust or team or whatever. So we're seen as independent organisations, unfortunately. So it means that it's not actually available to many people. But in the trust I'm working at the moment, we are using Flex Dashboard because the Shiny, although they have a Connect server, the Shiny isn't available to everybody without logging in, because the Connect server now makes it so that it makes it public, and we can't have that public even though they're aggregate figures. So where Shiny's become very important over the Flex Dashboard, but we can't use it as a solution, is the scenario where you have a report, this is for incidents, and people like it in their department area, and then they want it in each other department area. So then you have 20 metrics that become 20 times 5, but it's the same code underneath it. So that's when reports, even when they're parameterized, we have to be very careful, because you'll have like a staging bit and a development, and it just kind of explodes really in numbers. So something like Quarto, if it can be used, is also very familiar to people, whereas Shiny can be quite difficult with its reactive nature and things. So there are lots of colleagues who know R and could use R Markdown or Quarto really easily, but then Shiny is like another step for people in their sort of maintenance side. So we've got this conundrum of what's available to us, what we can use and host, and we're all doing it cheaply, to be fair, as well, because there's always a license, and our alternative often is what the trusts already have, which tend to be the bigger products that are in the dashboard world. I won't name them, but people will know in their areas there's various sorts, and we get the response often is, well, you've already got this one, why don't you use that? So then the question is, what does this give added value to the products that we already have provide us with? And that would be the SQL tools or the dashboard tools, or even, let's say, the humble Excel.
So I just want to add a quick follow-up on we as a company, or like the Shiny team in particular, is keenly aware of that barrier you just described, which is folks who come from R Markdown and Quarto, and then they need to build something on Shiny. They sort of hit a wall, to be very blunt about it, which is like, this is very hard. And so without sort of saying that, I won't go and say that this problem has been solved by what I'm about to tell you, but I think they're working really hard on it. And so one of the things that folks are doing is they're attempting to leverage sort of modern large language models to create assistants. And so folks at Posit are putting a lot of engineering behind taking these models that sometimes help, but sometimes can be weirdly unhelpful, and actually turning it into something that's quite usable. So I'm going to share a link on the chat. So this is called Shiny Assistant. You can use it today, and this is built by the Shiny team, with sort of doing a lot of work behind the scenes on making it so that it is a chat interface to help you create Shiny applications. And so you can ask it to do things. It understands the context where you are operating, and sort of, it can work on like models that like currently Posit is paying for, but it can also like take it and sort of, so there's, it's quite useful. And for coding specifically, for like sort of softer questions, I found these models to be way more better than I expected them to be. I think the Google AI response is complete garbage, and it's helping destroy the internet as we know it, just to be clear where my positions are on these things. With that said, I've had surprisingly pleasant experiences with asking coding questions specifically to these models. So if you're perhaps skeptical, as I am, of the validity of these things, you should still give them a try. And I found them to be very useful to get started on something where you kind of know your way around R code, but you have to do this one new thing, and it's very easy to experiment. So Maybe this will be useful for your team, and I'm sure that if you use it and you have feedback, the Shiny team would love to do it and help it so that like this kind of friction is reduced as well.
Are you able to use them? I was talking to someone in, I think, healthcare, Northern Ireland, just this week, I guess 2 days ago. And he said they're not allowed to use LLMs at all.
Again, it varies, and it will vary from trust to trust, and it will vary from country to country. So I have heard one of the other UK countries doesn't allow anything in the cloud. I think that was right. Whereas you'll find in other countries, everything's in the cloud. So it's like, I'm not sure what the security implications are of either. So I can access it. I can see it on my trust's VPN. Cool. And I have seen it. It was demonstrated in our coffee and coding, which was by a colleague for the Shiny app thing. But we do have to be cautious about what we put in regardless. So there is that kind of like reliance on people being careful, but it's a bit of an unknown world, isn't it?
Yeah, I understand, and I apologize. So, like I said, I understand all of the constraints of these things, and like but even as a tool for self teaching, I found them to be useful. And then you can like take your learning and turn it off, and then actually do it on your side. And I found it to be
it appears in Word.
In that sense.
So when people who are not in the technical sphere see the AI in the corner of their Word, they probably don't know where that goes, how secure it is. So this is something that each trust has to consider in its own security. So it could be available and it might be completely locked down, but Northern Ireland is a lot smaller in who can interact with whom compared to, say, England. So I'm not sure yet what we can use, what we can't use, but it's available on mine. They probably just don't know.
You use it before they turn it off.
For the Shiny team, we also have looked about what would it mean to package it up in a way that people could run it within their infrastructure so they can kind of control other aspects of it. So if that's something that's interesting, do let us know. It's going to take a little bit of work to kind of get it wrapped up and make that easy, but that is something some clients have asked about, and that we have on a list of things to consider of ways to make it useful, because it really does help if it's behind your kind of firewall and in a protected kind of development environment, because then you can use your data and kind of control what's happening, run either a local model that you're running, or if you're on AWS, there's some possibilities there with Bedrock. If that's something that is of interest, do let us know.
Yeah, I think HMRC is working with some internal LLMs. So I know it's possible, but I imagine it probably takes pretty large organizations like that to have their own internal LLMs. Awesome, thanks. We have about 5 minutes, so we'll probably get to maybe 2 more questions. And I'll answer the next one pretty quick. But Quarto team or Andrew, feel free to jump in if you want. But the next question is, why did we make Quarto? And how's it different from R Markdown? Really quick on why we made it. The R Markdown ecosystem had a bunch of really awesome features that people really love. And as JJ mentioned in a recent presentation, it has a requirement for the NHS-R package. So folks from other languages would then have to accept that requirement for R and for the NHS-R package. And with Quarto, we're able to have folks experience all the great things from R Markdown, but without the requirements for R or NHS-R. Because there's a Jupyter engine with Quarto, anything that Jupyter engine can do, you can do it without having this dependency on R. And from a user point of view, there's some really nice things about Quarto over R Markdown. In R Markdown, I would have R Markdown, Blog Down, Sure Engine for presentations, so on and so forth, Flex Dashboard for dashboards. And you end up installing a lot of packages. With Quarto, all of that is all within the Quarto installation. And one nice benefit of that is it makes the syntax across all of those outputs the same. Whereas with Sure Engine, it has its own syntax for making presentations that's different from an R Markdown HTML output, for example. But in Quarto, same syntax across. So that's really nice user enhancement. Anything else on why Quarto from the team? If not, we can probably squeeze in another question or two.
Yeah, I was just going to say that not only can you do multiple languages, which you pointed out, it is a lot easier to use on a polyglot team or a multi-language team. And these are becoming more and more common, right? Where you have a team where some folks have R expertise and some folks have Python expertise because they come from different domains, or that's just sort of what they know. And so Quarto is designed so that you can have a website, or you can have even a book where one of the chapters is written in R and the other chapter is written in Python. And the end result should look the same, because essentially like different parts of the document are handled by different engines, right? The thing that takes your code and like intersperses it with the markdown you generate. And so it really is designed for sort of like this polyglot world in which we see R as being like an amazing tool. Like we're still supporting it. Our markdown is actually still supported. And like, it's not going anywhere, but there's a big whole world out there and we want things to play nice with one another. And Quarto is very much designed sort of, okay, what can we do to make that possible?
Cool. I think we have time for one more, and there is a technical question. It's 2 down on the list, so I'm going to ask that one since we have our technical folks with us. Is there a way to get Quarto to render output to a subfolder? I can then have the subfolder in the gitignore.
I was secretly hoping we would be able to like squeeze by without asking that question because time would bail us out. Unfortunately, that's surprisingly hard for us to do well. The reason for that is your knitr code or your Jupyter code has very deep expectations of where inputs and specific files are. And when you change that, and if you want to do like relocatable output in that way, you have to be very careful and know absolutely everything about what your like knitr script open or your Python file open, so that some of the dependencies that you might have moved, we need to move them in the right way. We need to understand the difference between absolute paths and relative paths and project paths. And we are not very well supported with that right now. So there are ways that if you really twist Quarto's arm, you can make it do it, but you're probably going to regret having made that decision. This is something we want to change in the next couple of years. So we are going to fix that, but it's not a short-term thing for the next release. There's a lot of work that we're doing on behind the scenes to enable that, and it's ongoing. But there are some formats that allow you to do that. There are some ways that you can make that work, but they are fraught with peril. It's sort of like you have to be ready for some sharp edges.
Christoph?
Yeah, to add on that, because the question is concise, but maybe it's about like the output dir flag. Just to be clear, with Quarto project, you can move outputs to another directory, but with single document you can't. Sorry. So it's if you use Quarto project, you will do it. It's how website works, our blog works. Your output will be in another directory. But with single document, it's not the same. So you could use Quarto project with default project and you could have something like that, but it's really difficult to do per document, as Carlos said. And it's something we are careful about because also of the history of R Markdown. Because in R Markdown, this was something possible. So users that know R Markdown may think like it's why shouldn't it possible with Quarto? But in fact, it's really difficult and we had a lot of issues, and path handling is really something like tricky. And we were stuck with what we did in R Markdown with some issue we weren't able to solve. So we want to do it the right way in Quarto, and it's why it's taking like longer or it's more difficult to do. It's also because of this history, like R Markdown Quarto being like step up to what R Markdown was doing.
So just to give a concrete consequence of that, right? So Christoph, correct me if I'm wrong, but in Markdown, the default option for you to use is this thing, sort of a self-contained output. You get one HTML with everything. So it's easy for you to sort of email them, right? You don't get it like blog down or like sort of package down, but like with a single Markdown document, you get one big HTML file with everything, right? If you want to put things on a website, that doesn't work so well because they all get all of the CSS and all of the fonts and all that in one file, and each file is huge, so you don't get any benefits of shared resources. Quarto goes the other way around and tries to make it so that it's efficient and like you can load things on your phone easily and things of that sort. As a consequence, we now need to be very careful of paths, and that's where these constraints come into play. Right, so we're trying to figure that out, but it's a long path. So we're doing a little better on some things, but don't hold your breath. If you absolutely need to, again, you folks have like an important relationship with us, please contact Jeremy. We'll talk with you. But sort of this is it's complicated is the answer.
All right, we're at time. Zoe, back to you.
I just want to thank everybody for coming and for putting up with some of the administration around this. And thank you so much for everybody for the questions and the answers to the questions. It's been really wide-ranging, a bit like the Quarto products that you've got as well. So I'll end the call, the recording, I should say.
All right, thanks everyone.